My name is Kate Riley. I'm the manager of education at Duke Farms. And Vaughn will be telling you more about Duke Farms if you need a little refresher, but we are a property of 2,470 acres or so. And our dedication is towards preservation of, the natural resources and also conservation, ecological research, and of course, education. It's all about education. So we're very happy that you're joining us today for this program that is really seasonally relevant. We're talking about keeping our watersheds healthy and clean. And then as we are approaching winter in whatever kind of weather patterns we've been having, which are also very interesting to observe. But, it was a little snow yesterday. So this is perfect timing for the program. We didn't know that snow was going to happen for us to initiate the program, of course, but it's just a lucky occasion that, hopefully you've seen some snowflakes, and then we can talk about how, how this season particularly is, critical for the watershed. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to one member of our education team, very creative and resourceful and wonderful member of our ed team, and that is Vaughn Scully, who will also then introduce Caitlin, who is a watershed ambassador. So you're going to be learning more about watershed ambassadors, what they do, how important they are in terms of education to the public. And we definitely support our watershed ambassadors. It's actually Vaughn's former position. So Vaughn was a watershed ambassador, and he can tell you about all of that work as well. So with that, I'm going to bug out, and I'm going to turn the program over to Vaughn and Caitlin. And thank you once again for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, so I will get us started here. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Again, for anybody who does not know me, I'm Vaughn Scully. I'm one of the educators, as Kate said, and I was a watershed ambassador. And we'll talk a little bit more about that program a little bit later, because the cool thing about this particular session of Live from Duke Farms, it's a little bit different from the ones that we've done before. Normally with Live from Duke Farms, I'm outside in the field somewhere. I am at Duke. I don't know if any of you recognize where I am, but I'm sure a lot of you missed this room. This is the classroom where we normally have all of our presentations and classes and programs that we do. So I'm pretty excited to be able to live stream from here. But instead of being outside, I'm in here because we are going to be demonstrating a model, an educational tool that we do use at Duke quite often, because it's a great way of connecting people with the health of our waterways and our water conservation priorities. So Caitlin is going to be doing that. I'm very excited for it. I was an ambassador, like I said, so I kind of feel like I get to pass the torch on to someone who's very intelligent, very capable. She's been really awesome so far. So I hope you guys enjoy that. But to get us going here, yes, we will be talking about, if I can make my PowerPoint go here. Come on, friend, let's go. There we go. All right. We are talking about water conservation as a whole here, and we're going to be focusing in the presentation part of this on Duke Farms specifically and the efforts that we have so far undertaken to preserve the health of our waterways, not just directly on the property of Duke, but beyond that as well. I'm not going to go into exactly what a watershed is, because I want Caitlin to be able to explain that with her model. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is more so a primer. I'm not really going to go into too much detail aside from talking about Duke Farms specifically and the work that we do. I want Caitlin to be able to explain her work and her research to you guys. So the big takeaway here, the thing I want you to focus on, is the idea that what happens on the land affects the water, and that is wherever you are on this planet, it doesn't matter. All of the waterways around our globe are connected to each other. They're all part of the same cycle. And what happens on the land, whether you are here in New Jersey or in Japan or Russia, it doesn't matter. What happens on the land affects the water and the health of that. And in turn, the health of everything else in that area. So I want to take a look at some awesome historic photos. So I know Ann Kuchiara is in this class here. So Carl Kuchiara is another one of our educators here, and he has a really awesome series on the Duke Farms Distance Learning Portal, which you should check out if you haven't yet. He's got a Postcards from the Past series, and he has access to this amazing collection of historic postcards that feature images of how Duke Farms used to be when it was Duke Gardens, when it was a private estate for Doris Duke, and before that, her father, obviously. So the land here on this nearly 3,000 acres was so vastly different from how it is now. And this image on the left-hand side, you can see, this is taken from one of the stone bridges, and it's overlooking some of our lakes, and that pathway that you can see is Fox Hollow. So for anyone who's familiar with the property, you probably know what I'm talking about. But if you were here now, which you should come visit, we're open 8:30 to 4:30, Monday to Friday. This view here is vastly different. On the right-hand side, this is a photo taken not too long ago. There's no hardscaping anymore. It's completely a different view. You wouldn't even realize that this is even the same lake system, because not only is the hardscaping gone, all of the trees have been allowed to come back. The shrubbery has been allowed to come right up to the edge there. You can't see Fox Hollow Lane anymore. And I'm not exactly sure if it was paved at that point, but now it is a gravel path. And even the color of the water, even though this is not a specific photograph, the color of the water is different because these lakes have been allowed to become more naturalized. They are man-made, but they've been allowed to collect sediment and to go through more of a natural lake process. And so if we look at some more images here, I can point out other examples. This absolutely grandiose fountain, this is right along Oak Way, and you can see now it is basically a meadow. We've done a lot of meadow restoration along with our water restoration, our lake restoration. All of this hardscaping has been removed. This entire fountain just doesn't exist anymore, and you wouldn't know that. Luckily, we do have these photos so we can see the beauty of the fountain, but there's a really important reason as to why this was removed, as to why we allowed this to go back to being an open grassland area. And in this image on the right, you can see another one of the stone bridges. Again, we've allowed the trees to come back to the water line. We've allowed those shrubs to grow up. We are maintaining the land, but we're not manicuring it anymore. And that all has to do with the water cycle. Hardscaping, all of the trouble starts with urbanization and hard landscaping. When we put down impervious surfaces. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country. We have an insane amount of impervious surfaces here compared to the amount of land that we actually have. And an impervious surface is anything like stone, asphalt, concrete, anything that does not allow water to infiltrate it, to flow through it. The natural water cycle relies on the fact that when the rain comes down, it lands on grass, it lands on dirt, it lands on trees, and it's allowed to flow into the earth, get sucked up like a sponge down underneath the surface of the earth, and it gets filtered through various levels of dirt and grass, gravel, different sizes of sediments. It mechanically filters that rainwater. And then once it's down underneath the ground, it becomes part of the groundwater system in an aquifer, and it moves underneath down into a waterway. Caitlin's going to talk about this a little bit more, obviously, but I want you to understand the effect of urbanization and putting down more surfaces when there's impervious surfaces and that rainwater is not allowed to soak up immediately, and instead it either sits on top of that impervious surface and doesn't replenish the groundwater, or worse, If it's even on the slightest angle, water is going to follow gravity and it's going to flow downhill and take everything with it that's on that impervious surface. If the water can't get through, then all of these everyday dangers also can't get through and get soaked up into the ground. Things like sediment from construction zones. Anyone living in New Jersey, driving on a highway, you see construction all the time. The amount of litter is terrible. Oil and grease from cars, pathogens like, yes, dog poop and other feces from other animals, things like Canada geese. When we have a lot of habitat for Canada geese, we know people grumble about geese poop all the time. Well, that's extra fertilizer, that's pathogens that are getting into the water because they're being swept downstream instead of soaked into the earth and filtered out. And right now, because it is December, and as Kate said, we did have our first snow of the season, road salt is a major, major issue. It's not a year-round problem, but the amount of road salt that is used is very, very dangerous. And I'll let Caitlin talk a little bit more about that too, as well, of course. Like I said, this is more of a primer for her demonstration later. But I'm sure you have noticed in the winter times when road salt is distributed, the sheer amount that's used creates mounds on the sidewalk, on the edges of the roadways. You can see it pooling at storm drains or in people's driveways. All of these things are not a problem because they exist. You know, fertilizers are not a problem because they exist. Sediment is not a problem because it exists. Road salt, not a problem that it exists. It's the sheer amount that is used, unnecessary. It's important to use it for safety. We don't want car accidents and people slipping on sidewalks and things like that. But the excess is the problem. And Caitlin will show you a little bit of that in her demonstration. So Duke Farms, we aim to be a leader of environmental stewardship. We are a gigantic functional display of all of the ways that human beings can coexist with the natural cycle around them. We use green infrastructure to show that it is possible to exist in a human realm within a natural landscape. And doing the work of restoration is really important. We do a lot to conserve our waterways, because what you see a lot in New Jersey is the image on the left-hand side of this graphic where there's terrible erosion. When that impervious surface is the amount of the impervious surface is so high and the water's not being absorbed right where it falls from the rain and it all gets swept away instead, that collects all of that water that would normally be spread out into a single storm drain that gets shot directly into a waterway, a stream, a river somewhere. And it is so high intense in volume that it washes away the edges of the riverbanks, which is erosion. You're not supposed to be able to see the root system of a tree. You're not supposed to be able to see exposed dirt. You should be seeing this right-hand image. This is how waterways are supposed to exist. You're supposed to have dense vegetation, different kinds of vegetation, all different trees and shrubs and grasses and flowers, all of those water-loving plants that are designed to help filter the water and help keep the soil in place and do all of those things. And you're supposed to see a lot of animals exist in there. If you just see one bird, that's not a healthy ecosystem. You should be seeing the fish and the turtles and all of the different birds. And so restoring these waterways is a big focus for us. We do a lot of invasive species management, and we do a lot of work studying the health of the water to be able to understand where our problems are coming from in the first place. But this is a lot of work. So Duke Farms does partner with a lot of different organizations. You may have seen any of our outside presenters from NRCS or USDA. One big program that we partner with every year for a long time has been AmeriCorps, the Watershed Ambassador Program, of which I'm an alum. That's how I started my career here at Duke Farms. So Caitlin is going to talk to you more about this program, but just to kind of give you a little bit of background, every year there are 20 watershed ambassadors, and AmeriCorps is a kind of umbrella organization that's federally funded. This is a specific program within the AmeriCorps program, and it's designated only for New Jersey, so that's pretty cool, it's very special. New Jersey is made of 20 different watersheds. Again, I'm going to explain more about that. But for each of those watersheds, there's one ambassador. If you look at the map there, the red outlined image, that is watershed number 9. That's the one that we are in right now for Somerset County in this area. Duke Farms is located here. And this is where Caitlin represents us and works with us. So ambassadors are responsible for a lot. They do a lot of things, and luckily all for free. And there's a lot of environmental education programs like this one. They do stream assessments, which I'll talk about in a second. There's environmental stewardship trainings where they go out and they engage the community and teach community members how to have in-home green infrastructure, doing a lot of rain barrel builds, how to create a rain garden at home, things like that. And then partnership projects where they actually work with different organizations in the communities, such as farms or the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership, if you've ever heard of them. They get to partner with a lot of really cool organizations and get a lot of networking done. It's very cool. So Caitlin can talk a little bit more about maybe some projects that she's done or things like that that she's really enjoyed during her term so far. But the stream assessments part, that's the one that is directly related to what we're talking about today. So we start studying the water by collecting and identifying benthic macroinvertebrates. And these are little bugs that are living in the stream. And these two images are collecting the bugs from the bottom and then sorting through and identifying them. So this is important. We care about them because all of these different little bugs, even though they might have a bit of an ick factor, they are the basis of our food web. Most of these are detritivores, which means they're a type of decomposer. So they're kind of at the bottom rung of the nutrient cycle. And they live on the bottom of the stream and they eat all of the decaying algae and plant matter and dead animals, things like that, that end up on the bottom. They clean them up and they recycle their nutrients. And then in turn, these little bugs are food for the small fish, which are food for the big fish, which are food for the great blue heron. So they're an integral, vital part of the food web. And when we study them, we can get an idea of the health of the waterway that we're looking at. Basically, all of these different macroinvertebrates, and there's a lot of them, they all have different pollution tolerance levels. So if you're finding only the ones that are very tolerant of pollution and can take a dirtier water, then you know you have a problem. Because none of the sensitive ones, the ones that need a really clean environment, if they're not there, you know you have an issue. So we use the research that Caitlin and the other ambassadors conduct to help guide our restoration efforts and our focus. So a little bit about Caitlin, because she's going to take over in just a second. She's a graduate from Middlebury College. She does live in Pennsylvania, but we won't hold that against her. She has a degree in environmental science. She's super cool. I have loved working with her so far. I feel like I got to pass the torch on to a really cool new generation of ambassador. So from here, I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit more and get onto the actual demonstration. So I hope you guys have fun with that. Caitlin, I'm going to mute myself and let you take over, all right?
Awesome. So hello, everyone. And if you can't see or hear me while I'm doing these introductions, just go ahead and let us know in the chat. So my name is Caitlin. I am this year's Watershed Ambassador for Watershed Management Area 9, as Vaughn was saying. And in just a second, we're going to finally give the definition for what a watershed is. So again, I graduated from Middlebury College. I'm a recent graduate. And I decided to do the Watershed Ambassadors program basically as a sort of professional development program in the environmental fields. There are 20 of us who are involved in this program, so it's a really great opportunity to network and get to know other young professionals and learn a lot of really awesome skills in the environmental field. So we're going to show you, and we have to flip the camera in order to show you our watershed model. So we're going to show you our beautiful watershed model, and I'm going to pass the camera on to my lovely videographer here. So this is a watershed. So basically in the chat, if you can go ahead and give your best definition of a watershed that you can come up with based off of what you see here and how this, what do you think that the definition of a watershed would be based off of this model? So basically, while you're thinking and while you're typing, notice that anywhere that you put water on this model is all going to flow to one place. It's all going to flow across the lands, down these little rivers, over these roads, and it's all going to end up right here at the bottom of our watershed model, right in this lake. So when we're thinking about a watershed, we're not actually really thinking about the water, we're more so thinking about the land. So a watershed is any area of land that all drains into a common body of water. So that's why this is a watershed. Anywhere that I put water on this surface, it's all going into that lake. And watersheds can be on a number of scales. So you can have a really small watershed like this one, where you're just thinking about this lake and you're just thinking about the area of land where, because of gravity, the water from rain or from the hose in your backyard, all of that water is going to flow into this lake. We can also expand things out farther and think about things on a larger scale, which is how we think about New Jersey with those 20 different watershed management areas. So the area that I work in, which is where Duke Farms is located, is WMA 9, or Watershed Management Area 9. So basically that area is defined by all of the lands that contributes water to the lower Raritan River. So that is what a watershed is. And basically, if you come in a little bit closer, we're going to actually explore the areas that we find in this watershed. So a lot of these things you see while you're driving around in the lower Raritan watershed, or where Duke Farms is located. We have residential areas up in the top corner with houses and dogs and cats and all these different residential pets. We have a factory up in this top corner. We have a hill with some trees. We have a construction site. We have a farm. Again, we have roads. We have bridges. So all of these things, or most of these things, are things that you see throughout the lower Raritan watershed. And right now, our watershed looks really clean. We have very beautiful green grass. We have dirt that's staying where it's supposed to. We have a beautiful pasture scene over here. But unfortunately, oftentimes there is stuff that gets into our watershed that doesn't make it look as clean as it does right now. So again, Vaughn earlier was talking about pollution. So go ahead and type into the chat again to make sure you're paying attention. Different types of pollution that we see going about our watershed, going about this area of lands that all drains into our lake at the bottom. So while you're typing those things out in the chat, we're going to go over them one by one. And we're basically going to use this food dye to represent pollution being put onto our watershed model. This is a really great educational tool because it's going to help us to actually visualize what Vaughn was talking about. It's going to help us see how pollution is going to get onto the land and end up in the water. So
yeah, Caitlin, I'm actually seeing a lot, all of these. Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Awesome.
Point and non-point pollution, somebody said, road salt, pathogens, dog poop, oil and grease. Yes, everything.
Awesome.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome. I'm glad that you guys are paying attention. So we're going to basically go through each of these sources of pollution and actually put them onto the watershed. So the first one we'll do is oil and gas. So when you're driving your car, sometimes you notice at on the bottom of your car can actually leak oil. It can leak gas. So we see that get onto the roadways here. So we're going to squirt our food dye onto the road. So again, make sure that you're checking your cars regularly to make sure that you're up to inspection, that your engine's not leaking oil, it's not leaking gas. We can get oil from the tractor. We can get oil from these construction vehicles, gas leaking from these construction vehicles. So already we're starting to see that there is visible pollution that's getting onto the land. There's another type of pollution that we can go over that Vaughn already alluded to, and that's poop. So your dogs, your cat, not so your cats, they use the litter box, but your dogs especially, when you're going for a walk, they will poop on your lawn, they'll poop on the sidewalks. And again, it's really important that we normally pick that up so that it doesn't get into our waterways, but sometimes people don't. Especially from farms, you have cows that poop, you have pigs that poop. We have all of these geese that they will poop all over the sides of roads, all over the roads, horses, chickens, manure, when you're depositing manure onto your crop fields, that can be a source of pollution. So we have, again, an increasing amount of dirt and muck and all this pollution that's getting into our waterways. And I also really like to think of pollution, to have a really concrete definition of what pollution is things that humans are putting into the environments that are not supposed to be there and that cause harm to the organisms and species and living things that live in the environment, and that can include us. So another source of pollution that is really important to think about is dirt. And a lot of times when I talk about sediment or dirt as a type of pollution, people are like, how can that be pollution? That's made in our environment. It's not something like plastic that I'm throwing out the window. But if you see here, we have trees on our hilltop. All of this brown is representing dirt. It's that sediment that right now is held into place. So trees, the things that hold trees into the ground is their root systems. Again, this is what Vaughn was saying. So when we take away these trees, when we deforest a system, when we take away the vegetation and the plants that are along the sides of our streams, there are no more roots that are keeping the dirt where it is. So this dirt now is free to go where it wants to go. And again, you see dirt here, all along here. All of this used to be, or should be, vegetation. This shouldn't be brown, it should be green, because we want to make sure that the sediment that isn't supposed to be getting into the environment is getting into the environment. We want to keep that sediment where it's supposed to be. And you can already see a little bit of a teaser of what's going to happen to this pollution once it flows into our waterways. And then, of course, we also have, as someone was saying, point source pollution that's coming from a specific place where we know where it's coming from. So we see this factory up here, and factories can emit a lot of stuff if they're not following regulations, or if there's a malfunction, or they're creating like byproducts from the things that they are supposed to be manufacturing. So they can also be releasing pollution from their drainage pipes or from their factories. So Vaughn, did you see any other examples of pollution before we get to our final example of pollution, which is road salt? Are there any things that I missed that people pointed out?
No, everybody was listening to the presentation. So you got the litter and the pathogens and oil and grease, all that good stuff.
Beautiful. I did forget litter, actually, which is one of the most, one of the hot button topics of pollution. So of course, just to add one final color of food coloring in here, we have litter, which is like the plastic bottles, which is like the, I once, as an ambassador, we go out and, again, how Vaughn was saying, we do stream assessments. And while we're doing these stream assessments, we sometimes find some pretty crazy stuff in the stream. The last time that I did a stream assessment, we found a toaster, a shopping cart, we found some bricks, we found an old pipe. You find a lot of stuff that people will deposit into the streams. So now if we look at our watershed, instead of it being this beautiful, clean area, all of a sudden you see that we have all of this muck in our watershed, all of this pollution, all these things that aren't supposed to be in our environment and are going to cause harm, both to the things that are on land and to the things that are in the water. And as Vaughn was saying, this time of year, we really have to think about road salt as well. So we're going to use sprinkles to represent road salt. The reason that we put salt onto our roads and onto our walkways is because that solute, the salt, is mixing with the water, and it makes it so that the water doesn't freeze at such a low temperature. It raises the point, it raises the temp, or it lowers the temperature. It changes the temperature that it needs to melt. I can never get the direction. But essentially, there's a problem in that we use so much of it. You can just see it get everywhere into our watershed. So we deposit it onto our roads, we deposit it onto our sidewalks. And unfortunately, as we're going to find out, nothing in this watershed is going to stay where we originally put it. It's going to get other places. So now I believe we are ready to experience a rainstorm in our watershed. So, I mean, we just had a pretty massive rainstorm all throughout the Northeast just a couple of weeks ago, or even just last week. And then recently we had a snowstorm. So when precipitation falls, that water is going to hit the surface of our watershed, and it's going to cause things to start moving. So you can see already that there's some movement in this river of all of this pollution that's slowly going to start getting into our lake. You can see here, right now, we're just dealing with a relatively light sprinkle. This would be just like your typical, a typical day with a light precipitation, maybe only an inch or two. My horse is falling over. But sometimes we have a much more massive dumping of water like we did just last week. So again, you can see it starting to move. It goes over the bridges, and you can see in our lake how things are already starting to pool. Things are starting to get into the water. And again, these things are pathogens. They can include bacteria. They include that road salt. They include all of these things that once they get into the water, they're going to cause problems. So now when we even have a larger rainstorm, all of this water is dumping, and it goes right over these roads, and it goes into our lakes, and it carries all of this pollution with it. And we could do this over and over and over again. And things are going to just keep building in our environment. You see the point source pollution from the factory causes a mad rush, and all of a sudden our water doesn't look clean. And there in the watershed that I work in the lower Raritan, people are using this water as well. People go into the water, they do full immersion bathing or swimming in the water. There are people in the lower Raritan who fish for sustenance in this water. So they're actually using the fish that they catch as a protein source. And of course, there are organisms and species that are also living in the water full time. And they, from the sediment that's getting into the water's getting too muddy and they're not able to see, or they're getting buried at the bottom of the stream. From the fertilizers and the pesticides that are getting into the water, there is going to be an increasing growth of algae, which could suck up all the oxygen in these waters and cause there to be less things available for everybody. There's a lot of things that are changing the characteristics of the water so that they're not healthy to be used by humans or by the organisms that live in the water. And one of those things is road salt. This road salt, all of these little specks that you see scattered on the road are getting swept up with that water and deposited into our rivers, which then gets into our lake. And the reason that's a problem is because these road salts have all of this chloride in it. And there is no natural process in these rivers or streams. There's no natural process to break down that chloride so it stays in the water. And these organisms that live in the water are adapted to very specific conditions. Again, Vaughn was saying that there are some bugs that live in the water that can tolerate different types of pollution. Clams is one of those. Clams, you can see clams everywhere. Leeches, you can see those everywhere. But there are other organisms that are just as important because they serve as food. They clean up the bottom of the stream by eating leaves. There's a lot of organisms that if slight changes happen, if the water temperature changes even just slightly, if the pH or the acidity of the water changes just slightly, that will change. If the water becomes too salty, that will change. There are some organisms that will die off as soon as things change. And again, when you're speaking on even just this small scale, look at how dirty our water has already become. And we're only looking at a very small part of our watershed. And all of these things happen probably in your area. So there's definitely a lot of things that we need to do and we need to think about to keep all of this from happening, to keep our lake from turning black. And again, this is a great opportunity to type into the chat different ideas that you may see that we could do to stop all of this non-point source pollution from running into our lake. And we have to think we have to stop emitting these non-point source, these sources of pollution into our environment. So we have to stop, we have to pick up our poop. We have to make sure our cars aren't leaking oil. But there's also a lot of things that we can do, like Duke Farms is doing, to, even when this stuff gets into our environment, to keep it from getting into the lake. You see that I have a little fence here next to our cows, so we can make sure that we keep our livestock from actually wading into the rivers, because that will be a huge help in terms of directly depositing that poop and stuff into our riverways. So we want to make sure that we keep our livestock out of the river. We want to make sure that we plant trees rather than take trees away, so that the root systems can hold the sediment into place, so that the sediment isn't rushing into our rivers. And when it comes to, again, we're thinking about road salt, we have to be really careful with where we put it and how much we put down, because oftentimes we use much more road salt than we actually need. And I forget the exact statistic, but I remember that you probably could use up to 1/10 of what you actually put onto your sidewalks, and it will be just as effective. We don't want to overload our roadways with all of this salt, because especially if there's too much of it, if there's too much salt, not all of it will even get dissolved into the water itself, which will then really carry it and dump it into our waterways. So again, there's a lot of different things that we have to think about. There's a lot of different ways that we can help our watershed. And again, if you have any ideas, you can definitely put them into the chat. The watershed ambassadors do a lot of things to run projects that help with mitigating against non-point source pollution. We help run cleanups where we go out and we take away some of what would be this food dye. We take away the food dye before it even gets a chance to run into our waterways. So we lead cleanups. We also help with restoration projects such as tree plantings. So we basically go out and we plant the trees along our streams or in important areas in our watershed where we're seeing a lot of sediment get rushed away, or areas of high erosion. We'll go in and we'll plant trees to try to help, again, with those root systems, keep those things in place. And we also lead workshops such as rain barrel building workshops. Rain barrels are basically giant 50-gallon barrels that you stick on the bottom of your gutter. So basically, when you have that rain barrel at the bottom of your gutter, instead of the rain immediately rushing out of the gutter and going onto the roads, it gets caught in the barrel and then you can slowly release it. So we lead rain barrel building workshops. And if you may be interested in building one, you can always reach out to a watershed ambassador or to Duke Farms, and they can provide you the resources to do so. So there's essentially, again, there's a lot of different things that we can do. The Watershed Ambassador Program is really conscious of helping community members figure out what they can do to help solve this problem and go out and clean up the problem itself. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now or to email me or Vaughn or Kate later. And we would love to talk more about how we can use this watershed model to continue to educate people on non-point source pollution and why it's really important that we mitigate against it, and also use it to help us make our watershed not look like this and look more like how it looked in the beginning. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now, and otherwise I hope to be in contact with you all soon. Yeah.
Awesome. Caitlin, thank you so much. And somebody pointed out that apparently there's a high-pitched note when I put my microphone on. I apologize. I don't know what that's coming from. There's nothing happening here, so I apologize. But in chat, we did actually have a couple really cool comments, a couple really good questions. So is the Watershed Ambassador Program throughout New Jersey or just at Duke Farms? It is all of New Jersey. It's a New Jersey specific program. So no matter where you live, there is an ambassador assigned to your location. So again, if you're interested in connecting with the program, feel free to email me, vselly@dukefarms.org. You will be getting resources from me after the program today. You'll probably get them over the weekend. That will have my email attached to it. So you can always contact me with questions about that. Also see some comments about apparently some road departments are brining the streets before snowstorms. So Not really sure what's in the mixture. I have heard of this before vaguely. Instead of using actual chunks of salt, using like a solution, like a salt solution. So it's a bit more diluted. That may be a better option. I don't know. The problem is, and a big part of this is we have to remember that a lot of these problems, people are only recently realizing that they're problems. So there's research being done now, but not necessarily concrete solutions yet. Hopefully this brining one works. Hopefully the amount of salt in there is at a level that's much more appropriate and a bit safer for the environment. I don't know. I guess only time will tell. It also depends on what else they're adding to that solution. And then also talking about using different things to pick up oil, grease, and gasoline spills. Using cat litter, yes, that is adding another pollutant. If you're using cat litter to soak up something in your driveway and then just leaving it, that's just adding to it. Sure, you won't slip on it, but you are adding to the pollution. That's correct. And then so you should be taking that up once it's soaked up, scooping it up, removing it from the surface and depositing it in the waste, things like that. Basically just trying to keep these things off of impervious surfaces so that it's not sitting there, it's not getting carried away. And let's see if there's anything else. So yeah, if anybody else has questions specifically about ambassadors, please let me know. I can connect you with the ambassadors program. You can always find resources through our distance learning portal. We have wonderful programs all the time from guest speakers like Caitlin and our own education team. So keep an eye on our events page, keep an eye on the distance learning portal. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to Kate Riley, kriley@dukefarms.org. Reach out to me if you would like. And I really hope that we see you here at Duke. We're open during the week. Come visit, come see this wonderful restoration that we're doing. So Caitlin, thank you so much. And I hope to see you out on the trails, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.